Welcome to Gentle Night's Rest, a peaceful place for sleep stories and calming ASMR sounds. If this space helps you relax, please like the video and subscribe to support the channel and enjoy more restful nights ahead. Now, close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let the night carry you into gentle rest. Florence slept outside. Inside, ideas waited quietly. Half-finished inventions stood patiently. The genius chamber was resting. Everything would continue in its own time. The workshop occupied the upper floor of a stone building, reached by narrow stairs, away from the street's noise, away from interruption. This separation was intentional, necessary. The work required solitude, required space for thought, required freedom from distraction. Windows faced east, toward the Arno River, toward the hills beyond. During the day, light flooded in, perfect for drawing, for observation, for the detailed work that filled the hours. But now, with night fallen, those windows showed only darkness, only the occasional flicker of distant lanterns, only stars. The room was large, but felt full, not cramped, just occupied. Every surface held something, every corner contained some project, some exploration, some question being investigated. This was not disorder. This was active engagement with the world. This was curiosity made physical. The walls were covered, not with decoration, but with work. Drawings pinned everywhere. Sketches, studies, observations, some detailed, some quick, all purposeful, all part of the great investigation. Anatomical studies showed muscles and bones. The human body understood as mechanism, as system, beautiful in its complexity, drawn with precision, with reverence for truth. These were not art for display. They were knowledge. They were understanding made visible. Mechanical drawings hung beside anatomical ones. Gears, levers, pulleys, systems for transforming motion, for multiplying force, for achieving what muscle alone could not. Each drawing carefully labeled, annotated, questioned. Nothing was accepted without investigation. Studies of water flowed across another section. Eddies, currents, the way liquid moved, the patterns it formed. These observations connected to other interests, to painting, to engineering, to the fundamental nature of movement itself. Everything connected. Everything informed everything else. The walls were not static. Drawings were added, moved, removed. The arrangement changed as understanding deepened, as questions evolved, as new connections emerged. The walls were alive with thinking, with process, with the ongoing work of understanding. A large table dominated the center of the room. Its surface was oak, worn smooth, stained with use, marked by decades of creative work. This table had supported countless projects, had been witness to breakthrough and frustration, had been the foundation for discovery. The table was covered now. Papers, books, tools, models, and organized chaos, or perhaps chaotic organization. Everything had its reason for being where it was, even if that reason was apparent only to one mind. Open notebooks lay scattered, pages filled with mirror writing, left to right reversed, a personal script, difficult for others to read. Perhaps that was intentional, perhaps it simply felt natural. The left hand wrote this way more easily, so this way it was. Drawings filled the notebook pages, text and image intertwined, explanations beside sketches, questions near observations. The notebooks were thinking made visible, not final, not polished, but honest, true to the process. Instruments rested among the papers, a compass, several, for drawing circles, for measuring, a straight edge, rulers, calipers for precise measurement. These were extensions of sight, of understanding, tools that made the invisible visible, that brought precision to observation. On one corner of the table stood a wooden model, a flying machine, partially constructed, wings of fabric stretched over a wooden frame. Based on observation of birds, of bats, of how nature achieved flight, could humans do the same? The model waited, patient. The question remained open. Another model showed gears, a mechanism for grinding lenses perhaps, or for some other purpose requiring smooth rotation. The gears were carved with care, fitted precisely. This was investigation through building, understanding through making. A model of a bridge occupied another space, arching, self-supporting, elegant in its efficiency, based on observation of how weight distributed, how force flowed through structure, beauty and function unified, as they should be, as nature showed they could be. These models were not toys, not decoration. They were questions posed in 3 dimensions, hypotheses tested in wood and fabric and metal. They were thinking made tangible, made testable, made real. Some models were complete, others half-finished, abandoned when the question was answered, or when a new question proved more compelling. This was natural. Curiosity led where it led. Following was the work. Completion was secondary to understanding. Loose papers held quick sketches, studies done from life, a hand in various positions, the drape of fabric, the play of light across a face. These were observations, data, reference for future work. Architectural sketches showed buildings never built, ideal cities, fortifications, structures that existed only in imagination, only on paper, but complete there, worked out in detail, real in conception if not in stone. Botanical studies captured plants with precision, leaves, flowers, seeds, the patterns of growth, the geometry underlying organic forms. Nature was the greatest teacher, showed principles that applied everywhere, in painting, in architecture, in understanding itself. Some sketches were fantastic, impossible, dragons, floods, apocalyptic visions. These were imagination-freed. But even here, observation informed creation, wings drawn from bird study, water from careful watching of rivers, fantasy grounded in reality, always. The sketches overlapped, covered each other, formed layers. This palimpsest of ideas showed the mind's movement, from thought to thought, from question to question, never still, always investigating, always curious. One corner was dedicated to painting. An easel held a panel, work in progress, gessoed and prepared but barely begun. Just the first sketches in charcoal, compositional studies. The painting would wait, would be completed, when the time was right, when understanding was sufficient. Pigment sat in jars, ground minerals, lapis for blue, malachite for green, ochres for earth tones. Each pigment had been prepared with care, ground to perfect fineness, mixed with oil or egg according to need. These were precious, were treated with respect. Brushes stood in a jar, different sizes, different shapes, each for specific purposes, fine details, broad washes, each brush maintained carefully, cleaned, shaped, ready for use. These were instruments of precision, required care, deserved it. Oil and medium sat in small vessels, walnut oil, linseed, various varnishes. Each affected the paint differently, changed drying time, changed transparency, changed final appearance. Understanding these materials was essential, was part of the craft, part of achieving the desired result. The smell of oil paint lingered, mixed with pigment dust, with wood, with paper. This combination created the workshop's distinctive scent, the smell of creation, of investigation, of work in progress. On a side table lay a human skull, not macabre, educational, necessary for understanding, for drawing the head correctly, for seeing beneath the surface, for knowing why faces looked as they did. Beside it, drawings, studies made from dissection, from direct observation, muscles layered, vessels traced, bones measured. This was knowledge acquired firsthand, not from books alone, from investigation, from careful observation of reality. The drawings were beautiful, not despite their subject but because of the care taken, the precision, the desire to understand truly. Beauty emerged from truth, from accurate observation, from respect for what was being studied. These anatomical investigations informed everything: painting, sculpture, understanding of movement, of expression, of how the internal created the external, how structure determined appearance. This knowledge was foundational, essential. The skull waited, silent, patient. It had taught much, would teach more. Was itself a study in form, in the geometry of structure, in how nature solved problems of weight and protection and function. Books lined one wall, not many. Books were expensive, precious, but these were well used. Covers worn, pages marked. These were tools, resources, teachers. Vitruvius on architecture, studied, annotated, argued with in the margins. Classical knowledge engaged with, not accepted blindly but tested, questioned, built upon. Medical texts, anatomical treatises, imperfect, sometimes wrong, but starting points, foundations to build upon, to correct through direct observation, through independent investigation. Books on optics, on geometry, on mathematics. These were languages for describing reality, for understanding proportion, for achieving precision. They were studied not for their own sake, but for what they enabled. Some books lay open, passages marked, connections being investigated, questions raised. The books were not authorities, they were conversations, dialogues across time with other curious minds. Lenses sat on a cloth, various curves, various powers, for studying, for magnifying, for understanding how light behaved, how vision worked, how representation could be achieved. A camera obscura occupied one corner, a box with a small hole, demonstrating how images formed, how light traveled, how the eye itself worked. This was investigation of seeing itself, of the fundamental act of observation. Mirrors of various sorts reflected candlelight, flat, curve, each showing something different about how light behaved, how reflection worked, how perception could be manipulated, or clarified, or understood. These instruments were not separate from the art, they informed it. Light and vision were the painter's tools. Understanding them deeply made better painting possible, made truth achievable, made beauty something that could be created with knowledge. A lyre hung on the wall, sometimes played, sometimes studied. Music was mathematics made audible, was proportion expressed in time. Understanding music informed understanding of everything else. Beside it, drawings of instruments never built, improvements, variations, questions about how sound was produced, how it could be modified, how new timbres could be achieved. Curiosity extended everywhere. No domain was separate, all knowledge connected. The lyre was beautiful, functional beauty, form serving purpose perfectly. This was the ideal, what all creation should achieve. Perfect union of appearance and function. This principle applied to everything: painting, architecture, engineering, all. Candles provided light now, several, placed strategically, near the work table, by the easel, creating pools of illumination in the darkness. Their flames were steady, the air still. The candlelight was warm, golden. It softened everything, made the cluttered room feel peaceful, made the organized chaos feel intentional, feel right. The light transformed, made the space contemplative, quiet. Shadows were deep. The room's corners disappeared into darkness. This created mystery, but not threatening, just peaceful. The unknown portions of the room could wait. What mattered was illuminated. The rest could rest. The play of light and shadow was itself a study, something observed, something understood, something used in painting to create depth, to show form, to make flat surfaces appear three-dimensional. Light was fundamental, always. The room was silent, profoundly so. Florence outside was quiet. Night had stilled the city. Inside, the only sound was the occasional candle flutter, the slight creak of wood settling, nothing more. This silence was productive, was where thinking happened, where connections were made, where the pieces came together. Silence allowed concentration, allowed depth, allowed the mind to work without interruption. The silence held all the day's work, all the observations made, all the questions asked, all the drawings completed. It compressed them, preserved them, made them available for tomorrow's continuation. In this silence, the room breathed. The ideas rested but remained alive, ready to be engaged with again, ready to evolve, ready to lead to new questions, new investigations, new understanding. Everywhere, projects waited, half complete, promising, each representing hours of work, of thought, of investigation, but paused now, set aside, not abandoned, just waiting for the right moment to continue. A sculpture in clay, a horse, studies for a monument never completed. The clay was still damp under its cloth covering, still capable of being worked, still holding the marks of fingers that shaped it, still waiting. Designs for theatrical machines, for spectacles, for creating wonder, sketches showing how dragons could appear to fly, how clouds could seem to move, how illusion could be created through understanding of mechanics, of optics, of human perception, studies for an equestrian monument, pages and pages of horse anatomy, of movement, of balance, of how bronze could be cast in such quantities, how the weight could be supported, how the impossible could be made real. These unfinished works were not failures, they were process, they were investigation. Completion was less important than understanding, then learning, then discovering. The journey was the work, the destination was less important. The notebooks held everything: observations, questions, calculations, recipes, lists, ideas. They were the external memory, the place where thinking was preserved, made permanent, made available for review and reflection. The handwriting was distinctive, mirror reversed, flowing, quick, sometimes barely legible even in mirror, written for one reader only, for the writer himself. Private communications with future self. Diagrams interrupted text, text wrapped around diagrams. The page was space for thinking, not constrained by convention, not limited by expected organization, free-flowing, following thought wherever it led. Some pages were calculations, mathematical, proportions, measurements, geometry, numbers describing reality, describing ideal forms, describing relationships between things. Other pages were observations of weather, of water, of light, of human behavior. Everything was worth noting, worth preserving, worth potentially connecting to something else later. Through the window, Florence was barely visible. Dark buildings, dark streets, but above, stars, clear, bright, arranged in patterns that had been observed for millennia, that had been used for navigation, for timekeeping, for understanding humanity's place in the cosmos. The stars had been studied here, drawn, their positions noted, their movements tracked, not for astrology, for understanding, for seeing if patterns could be found, if predictions could be made, if knowledge could be gained. The window also showed clouds sometimes, weather, formations of air and water. These too had been studied, drawn, wondered about. How did they form? Why did they move as they did? What could they teach about the world? Beyond the city, hills rose, olive groves, vineyards, the Tuscan landscape. This too had been observed, sketched, understood as geology, as agriculture, as beauty. Everything was connected, everything informed everything else. Tomorrow, work would resume, questions would be engaged, projects would continue, new observations would be made, new connections would form, the investigation would go on. But that was tomorrow. Tonight was for rest, for allowing the mind to process, to integrate, to prepare for tomorrow's work. Rest was not separate from creation. It was part of it, essential to it. The candles would burn down, would be replaced or allowed to go out. Morning would bring new light, better light. The light that made detailed work possible, that allowed true seeing. The projects would wait, patient. They had waited before, would wait again. Time was not the enemy, rush was. Haste prevented understanding. Patience allowed depth, allowed truth. Florence slept outside. Inside, ideas waited quietly. Half-finished inventions stood patiently. The genius chamber was resting. Everything would continue in its own time. This was a place of investigation, of curiosity, of tireless questioning, but also of peace, of patience, of trusting that understanding came through sustained engagement, through observation, through thought. The room held the accumulated work of years, decades, a lifetime of investigation, of creation, of seeking to understand, to see clearly, to know truly. All this rested now, waited for morning, waited for continuation. Rest came easily here, among the evidence of dedicated work, among questions earnestly pursued, among the physical manifestation of curiosity. The room protected its projects, held them safely, allowed them to wait. Sleep now. The workshop watches. The ideas rest. The investigations pause. You are held. You are safe. You are part of something eternal. The great human project of understanding, of seeking truth, of creating beauty.